next month, and then it'll be available for public use in a year. We're talking a much longer timeline than that. And that's really to ensure that this is a safe intervention that works, and the company can market it for what it says it does.
Oh, that's great, because I thought it was gonna be like 15 years, so 5.
Yeah, that's all.
Online, it said like 10 to 15 years typically, clinical trials, so
Well,
that's great.
yeah, I mean, I think for some of the other interventions, it could be a little bit longer. This one's further along than some of the other interventions that are percolating through. Yeah.
Have they ever done studies like this where they found halfway through the study that it's much more than they expected and would say we don't have to wait the 5 years? They would actually say, based on the proof that we have, we could actually cut this down to 2 or
Sure.
3 years and say, you know.
So if
get
you look
the
at what
focus.
happened with the spinal muscular atrophy kids, so spinal muscular atrophy is a disease that something like 90% of kids are dead by a year. It's really, it's devastating to newborns. And the antisense oligonucleotide that was developed worked so well they stopped the trials early and it got approved. Because the kids now are 3 and 4 years old and they're developing normally and they're going through life like any other kid. Because it's just that profound in terms of the efficacy. So if we found some intervention that changes the course of Huntington's disease overnight and really improves people or stops the disease in its tracks, absolutely, that study will be stopped early. When studies are going on, there's something called a data safety monitoring board, and they look at the safety side of things. Is it causing liver problems? Is it causing kidney problems? Are people dying at a faster rate than we might expect in a heart attack trial, kind of a thing? So they look to make sure that it's safe. But then there's also the efficacy side of things. They look to make sure, are we ethically able to continue this clinical trial because there are either moderate or little differences between the two interventions, or are there huge differences that really make a difference in people's function, lives, and safety? And so that's one of the things that's looked at on a recurrent basis. It's still blinded. I've been on those, I've seen them, so they get, blue group and green group. They don't say, the Ionis HTT RX group and the placebo group. You don't see that. You just see the two different groups, and is there a difference between those groups? So it's still blinded along the way. Yeah.
So for this study, because it was just phase 1, phase 2, they weren't really tracking if anybody had symptoms reduce, it was just the protein?
No, they were looking at symptoms too. This is just kind of the preliminary look at the data. It's going to be published and vetted by peers, and there's a lot more information, I'm sure, that's going to be coming out of this trial that was run. This is just really the most exciting news that was coming out of this, that what's in lingo top line. So it was what everyone was waiting for. But I think that there's a lot more to this data. Dr. Tabrizi and Dr. Wild are great scientists. And so they weren't just looking at this and done and now moving on. There was a lot of information that was collected, and so that will eventually be published in time. But this was kind of the preliminary result that was released.
I don't know if you already answered, but because of these studies, if they decided to do clinical trials here in the US, can they use those as the phase 1 and 2 pieces and say, we can go right to a phase 3?
Yeah, so that's a question to have with the FDA,
Okay.
right? And so many times in orphan diseases, when there is a real unmet need, meaning that there isn't anything out there that can change the progression of the disease, will you allow this to move forward in an expedited fashion? And the answer is yes. And there still has to be a definitive phase 3 placebo-controlled trial for efficacy that confirms the safety, but there also has to be a preponderance of data to support it. And so that's where this kind of a trial can add in as that preponderance of data. So traditionally it was 2 phase 3 double-blind placebo-controlled trials, but that's just not possible in orphan diseases in general. And for something like Huntington's disease, it's this kind of data that's used in addition to that traditional phase 3 trial.
Is there any way to kind of like agree to take on more risk and just, I'm assuming if you just kind of pay someone to do this to you,
You can't do that. But I'll give you an example, a real world example. Tysabri is a medication that's on the market for MS. And 1 in 1,000 people developed this rare virus and actually died because of it. And so the FDA said, people are dying from this drug, we're pulling it from the market. It was pulled. The MS community got together and said, wait a second, this drug is so important and so life-changing, we need this on the market. And so because of the patient community and patient voice, the drug was actually put back on the market, and there was more studies, and it turns out that if you have this one particular virus that we can measure, you're at risk for getting this infection. But if you don't, you're not going to get this. And so now that's the decision point. But because of the patient community talking to the FDA and having a voice, say through HDSA and Huntington's disease, can do the same thing, that drug got back on the market. So I think any opportunity that the community has to advocate with our local legislators, with our local community, statewide, countrywide, whether it's the FDA, whether it's NIH, any kind of federal agency that oversees the development of research and drug development, whatever you can do to step in and say, this is important to us, please let this go forward. Your voice does matter.